Good morning. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Happy Tuesday. Happy spring. It's a little bit cool for spring this morning, but no rain, so that's good. We're going to begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrasts, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. All right. Getting straight to our quotes this morning. The first one is a long one, but it's an important one. We're going to come back to it. It's actually called Dare to Be. When a new day begins, dare to smile gratefully. When there is darkness, dare to be the first to shine a light. When there is injustice, dare to be the first to condemn it. All right, now I want to stop right here and make a little and interject something. Now, be the first to condemn injustice, but not the people perpetrating it. Okay, we've talked before about that it is systems and dynamics that we need to stand up against, not people. The people perpetrating the injustice are just those that have been caught up in the bad conversation or in the system or the dynamic. So, I just wanted to throw that in. Continuing on, when something seems difficult, dare to do it anyway. When life seems to beat you down, dare to fight back. When there seems to be no hope, find some. When you're feeling tired, dare to keep going. When times are tough, dare to be tougher. When love hurts you, dare to love again. When someone is hurting, dare to help them heal. When another is lost, dare to help them find their way. When a friend falls, dare to be the first to extend a hand. When you cross paths with another, dare to make them smile. When you feel great, dare to help someone else feel great too. When the day has ended, dare to feel as you've done your best. Dare to be the best you can, and at all times, dare to be. That was by Steve Maraboli. All right, the next one, not quite so long. The famous philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, compassion is the basis of morality. Next, by the Dalai Lama, love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. Mahatma Gandhi, we're having some heavy hitters with our quotes this morning. It is easy enough to be friendly to one's friends, but to befriend the one who regards himself as your enemy is the quintessence of true religion. The other is mere business. All right, next, it is an absolute human certainty that no one can know his or her own beauty or perceive a sense of her own worth until it has been reflected back to them in the mirror of another loving, caring human being. John Joseph Powell. And the last quote is the one that I want to focus on today. It's by a man named John Green, and it's simply the only way to get out of the labyrinth of suffering is to forgive. So there's another quote that I've read to you before that says, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. The distinction between those two words will be important later on in the teaching, so let's clarify a little right here at the beginning. In physical terms, pain is that initial sensation when you come into contact with something harmful to you, when you touch something hot or sharp, or when you get hit with something, or when you fall down and your body makes contact with a hard surface, or there's a sudden, very uncomfortable sensation somewhere inside your body, like your joints or perhaps your stomach or your head. That's pain. And yes, unfortunately, that is a pretty unavoidable part of the human experience that we are having here on earth. Suffering is prolonged pain. pain that doesn't go away relatively quickly, or that has no instant, or not really instant, but no remedy that you can see at the moment. Emotionally, it's the same. Pain is just a part of the deal of being human, but suffering, in my opinion, is optional, because you always have a choice as to how you will handle the pain when it comes, whether it's physical or emotional. I've given you this little fact before, and I think that it bears repeating. Studies show that a negative thought will naturally stay in the forefront of your consciousness for about 90 seconds or a minute and a half. After that, you have to actively work to hang on to it in order for it to stay in your mind. So, do you see how beautifully nature works? We are built for these strong emotions, these strong and negative emotions to pass through us. They tested apparently lots of people and found that for a minute and a half, which is longer than you might think. If you just sit there and do nothing for a minute and a half, it's a pretty long time. You're going to naturally be focused on this emotion that's causing you pain, whether it's anger or jealousy or sadness or fear or whatever. But after that period of time, that first 90 seconds, you choose whether to let it go and move on through you, or and onto another more positive thought, or to put the effort in that it takes to hang on to it in order for it to stay in your consciousness. So that's the line. That's when pain turns into suffering. And that's why the quote says it's optional, because you can choose to let pain go. So let's shift a little now and look at another possible solution and remedy for suffering. You can choose to let the pain go after that initial feeling of it and sitting with it briefly, a minute and a half. But if you don't, and it turns into suffering, if it crosses that line, what then? Well, there's a Buddhist principle that says desire and or attachment is the root of all suffering. So the solution there would be don't desire anything or don't be attached to anything, and you won't have to suffer. But we've already made the argument in a different teaching that for how that principle, again, in my opinion, has often been misunderstood and misused in order to cut ourselves off from other people and to avoid the very experience of being human. In a way, that's not actually solving the problem. It's running away from it. We've got a new baby kitten at our house, and kittens are a lot like babies. When they are young, you do what is called baby proofing. Okay, you put rubber around the hard corners. You pick things up off the floor that they would get in their mouth and not be good for them. When something is in their path that is a potential harmful situation for them, you move it out of the way. But that's what you do for babies, okay? You help them avoid anything that could hurt them. But guess what? That if you kept doing that as they grew, they would never learn. Doing that, in my opinion, that whole avoidance thing of, well, if I don't want to suffer, I'm just not going to be attached to anything, and I'm not going to ever want anything. That way I won't suffer. That just keeps you at a very immature baby level because in my opinion, and I'm saying that a lot today because I don't, it is my opinion, but that's just baby proofing yourself through life and never really growing up. All right. So today we're going to start there and continue on with that line of thinking and see what the alternative is in order to deal with suffering. If it's not detaching ourselves from others completely, and if it's not eliminating all desire from our life, then what is the answer? Well, as in most things, it's probably more than one. But the one I want to talk about today is compassion, which our last quote alluded to. So let's read it again. The only way out of the labyrinth of suffering is to forgive. So let's break this down a little. First of all, the word labyrinth. What does that really mean? According to the dictionary, a labyrinth is a place constructed of or full of intricate passageways and blind alleys. A maze, as in a garden, formed by paths separated by high hedges. So this quote is comparing the experience of suffering to an intricate maze or path full of blind alleys, or a place that's very difficult to find your way out of, which I would agree. Suffering can be, or at least it can feel that way when you're in the middle of it. And this man, John Green, the author of the quote, is saying that the only way out is to forgive. So instead of detaching or trying to eliminate all desire from your life, he believes the way to end suffering is through forgiveness, which I tend to agree is a much better solution. Again, all due respect to the Buddha and to Buddhist principles, I think that that particular one has been terribly misinterpreted and used to avoid life. As I just said, it keeps us emotionally immature. So in order to forgive, you must have at least some degree of compassion for the person you're forgiving. And that includes yourself if the person you need to forgive is yourself. I'm going to read now a piece called Life Packaging by a woman named Madison Taylor. So, and when you listen to this, I want you to remember, you know that song we sing around here? You're not a natural being having a spiritual experience, but you're a spiritual being living this natural experience. She begins with this same premise. She says, we are spiritual beings living in a human body. Even though our packaging seems different, we're very much the same. We've all had the experience of encountering someone whose life seems so completely different from ours that we can almost imagine we have nothing in common. However, if we go deeper into observing, we will see that we all have the same things going on in our lives. Everybody experiences loss, grief, happiness, excitement, anger, and fear. And everyone struggles at times with difficult choices. Our lives show up differently, or I think a more descriptive way to say that is our lives take different paths because we each learn in different ways. So time out for a second. If there's one thing I've learned over the course of my 25 years of teaching and working with kids, whether it was in the academic setting or in children's church, it's that different kids learn differently. And if you try to approach every child the same way and think that's going to work, you have another thing coming. There are all kinds of different learning modalities and styles. Quickly, I'm just going to run through them. There's visual, where you learn through pictures and images. Auditory, where you learn through sound and music. Verbal, where you prefer using words, whether that's reading a book or listening to a lecture. Kinesthetic or physical, where you learn best by actually doing. Logical, where you relate more to mathematics and reasoning and logic. And social, which is where you learn best in a group. And finally, solitary, where you prefer to work alone and use self-study. So these styles of learning are not connected to academic learning only. That's how we learn everything in our lives. Whichever of these styles works best for us, and we usually have one that's predominant, but usually a couple will work for us. That doesn't end, that way that we learn doesn't end at the end of the school day or even when we're done with our formal schooling altogether. We continue to learn all the time as we go through life, and these learning styles stay with us throughout our entire lives. So because we all have these different styles and ways that we learn best, life must present itself to us in different ways, or more accurately, that's why we take different paths in life. Okay, back to the article. The last line was, our lives show up differently for each one of us because we each learn in different ways. One person may need to learn the value of money by having too little of it, while another may need to learn by having more than enough. We each learn about work and love with experiences that are tailored to our particular perspective. Even as it appears that some people have it easy while others are in a continual state of struggle, the truth is that we are all learning, and it is very difficult to tell when looking only at the exterior of a person what's going on inside. This is one of the many things that can be so valuable about cultivating relationships with people from all walks of life. As we get to know those who seem so different from us, we get to really see how much of life's challenges and joys are universal. We begin to look beyond the packaging of skin color, clothing preferences, and socioeconomic differences, hairstyles, and the cars we drive, to the heart of the human experience. Now, when I read that line about hairstyles, it made me think of that old 1970s song, Walk a Mile in My Shoes. One verse says, "And so we spend the day throwing stones at one another, because I don't wear my hair the same way you do. Well, I may be common people, but I'm your brother. And when you strike out and try to hurt me, it's hurting you." So, man, that's a great song. Anyway, if we truly believe, which I do, that we're all connected, then how can we not be attached to each other in some way to some degree? That's why I have a little bit of an issue with that particular Buddhist principle. Now, I know there's a difference between healthy attachment and unhealthy attachment, and that's a whole other teaching. But back to today's teaching, the subject at hand, when we realize that we're all connected, then we know any attempt that we make to hurt someone else, and vice versa, anything we do to help another, anything we do to hurt somebody else hurts us, anything we do to help someone else helps us and lifts us up. So what is this connection that we have? What is it that connects us all? Being so different from each other, as we've talked about, what is the common thread that we need to tie us all together? Well, I believe that, and this is also a quote that we began with today, it's what it seems to imply, that it's the ability to forgive, which requires compassion. And that's what the thread is that ties us all together, and it's compassion. We're all different, and we may suffer in different ways about different things, just like we learn lessons differently. But the feeling of suffering is universal. And although there's no one specific way to alleviate that suffering, such as detachment, like the Buddhists believe, the most universal answer that would seem to work best for all of us, no matter how different we are or how differently we learn, is this concept of compassion, because it too is universal. So the last part of the article says, it is important to honor and value the differences in our packaging, but it is just as important to honor the gift of life inside each one of us, and the fact that no matter how different the packaging, the gift inside is the same. So in essence, what I'm saying here is, in order to end, or rather to alleviate, I don't think we're ever going to be able to end suffering entirely as long as we remain in this human experience, but because we're just hard-headed and we won't learn to let go of pain. But to alleviate the suffering, or to lessen it as much as possible, we need a more universal solution than detachment or the cessation of all desire, because that's not going to work for everybody in every situation. It doesn't work for me. So therefore, I know it doesn't work for everybody. It may work in some situations, but for the most part, that other stuff, detachment and cessation of desire, may work for some people, but for the most part, we're going to need a more universal solution that can be used by more people, which compassion is, because it is a universal feeling, to get us out of this, what the quote referred to as the labyrinth of suffering. So the question now is, how do we cultivate, do we grow, do we encourage compassion in our lives? I was listening a while back to a conversation. It was an interview, but it was really more like a conversation between Russell Brand and Brene Brown. He was supposed to be interviewing her, but he was giving just as much input as she was. And part of what they were talking about was this concept of compassion and how important it is to our human experience. So I'm going to share with you now some excerpts from their conversation. The first thing they were talking about is what happens, what the end result is when there is no compassion in society. Brene Brown said to him, "Do you want me to tell you how you can take over the world? All you have to do is stoke people's fear and uncertainty, and then deliver to them on a silver platter an enemy they can blame for that fear and uncertainty. If you can do that, you can rule the world. If you can weaponize vulnerability, fear, and uncertainty, get people really rattled and divided from each other, and then point at an enemy they can blame for their pain, you can get them to do anything, unless you have a self-aware, enlightened populace. Now, here's one of the problems with the idea of detachment. What did she just say here? One of the goals of the people who want to take over the world for their own selfish purposes is to divide us, because they know if they can do that, they can conquer us. It's even a saying, divide and conquer. Well, to my way of thinking, detaching is just another way of saying dividing. It's pulling us apart from each other. It's getting us to self-isolate, as it were, when we all know that where is the strength? The strength is in numbers. There are so many sayings and truisms that reflect this principle. United we stand, divided we fall. We shall all hang together, as in stick together, or we will hang, as in hang by a noose, separately. God told Cain in the Garden of Eden that, yes, he was his brother's keeper. So when we don't feel connected, when there's no attachment to each other, compassion cannot exist. And the conditions are then set up for us to be continually divided and eventually conquered. They also talked in this interview, I'm referring now to Brene Brown and Russell Brand, about the fact that every act of genocide began with dehumanizing a particular group of people, whoever it was that was decided the enemy was going to be, and then making other people feel like they were the enemy, like they were other than them. If you go back to the time of World War II even, and you listen to the language that was used in the movies, not only by the American and Allied soldiers, but, by the British people, the French people, just out in common, the everyday world. They referred to Germans as Krauts, very derogatorily. They referred to Japanese people as Japs. Later on, during the Vietnam era, the Viet Cong was referred to as Charlie, or worse, they referred to them as Gooks. And this was pretty normal back then. There was very little political correctness in those times. But that wasn't by accident. That was very much on purpose, because the people who were interested in promoting war knew that it is a natural tendency of humans to want to be and want to feel connected. It's not in human nature to pick up a gun or some other weapon and harm or kill another human being that you don't know and that you don't have a personal issue with. In other words, it's only instinctive to hurt or to try to kill someone if you're in a rage because of something they've done, either to you or to someone you love. That's called a crime of passion. So to get a huge group of men and women to be violent against people whom they have no negative passion towards, and that's what rage is, it's negative passion, you have to, as Brene Brown said, create for them an enemy. You have to make them feel pain in some way, and then introduce a group of people who are supposedly causing this pain in order to enrage the first group of people against the second group. That's not something that is innate within us, because deep down in our perfected Christ consciousness state, we know we're all the same. We know we're all connected. And so someone else, some third party, has to intervene and create a false narrative that we are enemies. But what's the next thing she said? This can't happen if there is a self-aware and enlightened populace who know we are all one and that we are all connected and interdependent. So in the next part of the interview, she talks about a research study she was part of in which they were studying compassion. And one of the questions they asked the people that they were interviewing as a part of this study was, do you think or do you believe that most people are doing the best they can in their daily lives? And if someone would answer no to that question, they would then follow up by asking them to write down the name of a person who they thought was not doing their best. And after they had done that, they would say, what if God came down and told you that that person was doing the absolute best they could? And she talked about one woman who had written down her sister's name. And the reason she'd written it down was because her sister had studied dance and was a classically trained ballerina. But when a career in that field didn't pan out for her, she became a stripper and began abusing drugs. And she had a couple of kids who she had exposed to a lot of things that her sister thought that children should not be exposed to. So she put her name down, her sister's name, saying, I don't think she's doing the best she can do. And when she was asked what her response would be if God himself assured her that her sister was doing the best she could, the woman burst into tears. When she was asked why she was crying, she said, if I knew she was doing the best she could, I would have to stop being angry and start grieving. So Brene Brown continues on by saying, as a result of this study, one of the conclusions she came to is that it's very hard to be compassionate to someone who we perceive is hurting us or someone we care about, because then it becomes personal, just like it was personal with this woman because she felt her sister was hurting herself as well as her children. But the answer to this, how we turn it around and become compassionate, even to those people in our lives, the solution is personal as well. It's when we can see something in them that we also see in ourselves, or when we can see them as ourselves, then we are able to find compassion for them. That's why a lot of times I say everything starts right here inside, because you can't really have compassion for someone else until you see a part of yourself in them. She went on in the interview to admit that before she had conducted this study, and even while she was in the midst of it, she was one of those people who didn't believe in general that people were doing their best. And then there was a moment that it became personal to her, and she describes this as a God moment. She tells the story of how she and her husband were going out one evening with some friends of theirs, another couple, and her husband was driving and the other man was in the front. She was in the back seat with the woman, and they were on their way to a restaurant for dinner, so they're just making small talk. And she says to the woman, hey, I'm doing this research study right now, and I want to ask you a question. Do you think people in general are doing the best they can? And her friend said, no, people are so lazy. At which point Brene said, she was thinking to herself, oh, this is why I'm good friends with this woman. This is why I like her, because we agree on things like this, that no, most people are not doing their best. And then the woman proceeded to give her an example. She said, what about those women who have kids and then stop breastfeeding before a year or a year and a half because it's just too convenient, or they have to go back to work and they don't want to use a breast pump? I think those women aren't doing the best they can. Why did they have kids in the first place if they weren't willing to do that? And Brene Brown says that all of a sudden she understood, because she said, I was one of those women that she was talking about. I quit breastfeeding my baby at 5 months because I had to go back to work and pumping just wasn't working for me. And I wanted to look at her and say, you don't know me. You don't know my life. I was doing the absolute best I could at the time. And she said, as soon as that thought entered her brain, it was like a light bulb went on, and she said, maybe all the people I think aren't doing their best really are, because I don't know them and I don't know their life and what they're dealing with, just like I feel this woman doesn't know my circumstances and has no right to judge me and my decisions. So there's the answer to the question. How do we cultivate compassion in our lives? By seeing the connection between us and others, by not judging others more harshly than we would ourselves, by giving people the benefit of the doubt, by seeing others as us. It's right there in the Bible. Love others as you love yourself. Treat others as you would be treated by them, or as you would want them to treat you. The last thing I'll mention from this interview has to do with that, with us simply giving other people the benefit of the doubt. I think in another teaching that we've done, referring to Brene Brown, she says, being generous with your thoughts about people. She said she asked her husband the same question. Do you believe that most people are doing the best they can? And he said, I don't know. I need to think about it. And so we walked away, but about 15 minutes later, he came back and he said, I don't have any idea, but what I do know is that my life is better when I assume that they are. And isn't that the truth? Even if they aren't doing their best, it's not our place to judge. And we feel better about life if we assume they are doing their best. I heard Esther Hicks say once, if you're thinking about something that doesn't make you feel good and that you don't want, thinking about it longer isn't going to make you feel any better or make you want it. So what's the point? Similarly, what's the point of not showing or feeling compassion for others or not believing that they're doing their best? At the end of the day, we don't know their life. And even if they're not trying their best, as I just said, it's better for our health and well-being to believe the best and to give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's what we would like for others to do to us. All right, so let's boil this down now to the core of what I'm saying today. Many people believe that being compassionate toward others is a good thing. They believe it's nice, but you know what? It's so much more than that. And it's really not something we can afford to think of as an option right now. As we'll see in the next piece I'm going to read, compassion and our ability to exercise it and to create it is actually the key to everything. So I haven't thrown any science at you in a while, and you know how I always like to do that when I can. So let me read this piece that's kind of scientific in nature that ties it all together. On July 4th, 2012, scientists at CERN, C-E-R-N, that the European Nuclear Research Facility in Switzerland, made an announcement that absolutely rocked the scientific community. Through one of their experiments, a new particle was discovered that would explain everything. It's called the Higgs boson particle. This also proves the existence of the field that scientists have been searching for 3 centuries, since the time of Sir Isaac Newton. That ether field that fills the empty space. It's what gives particles their mass. This field, the divine matrix, is the container of all things, everything in the known universe. It is also the bridge between our inner and outer worlds. It's what explains how our emotions, thoughts, feelings, prayers can be created from within us, yet still find the people and places that are the object of our prayers, whether they're in the next room or on the other side of the world. Okay, that because it goes through the field. Lastly, it's a quantum mirror in our world for what we truly believe in our minds and in our hearts, and what we create with our imagination. So when we ask the question, who are we? Our answer must incorporate our relationship to this divine matrix, this field. In a monastery in Tibet, the abbot, who is both a scholar and a scientist, was asked what the stuff was that fills everything and holds everything together. What is the force that allows everything to be as it is? His answer was compassion. He was further asked, well, is compassion a force that holds everything together, or is it an experience that we have within our bodies? He answered simply, yes. Compassion is both a force that fills the universe and holds everything together, and an experience we create within our bodies. One of the deepest secrets of history is that we have within us the ability to interact with the force that fills the empty space of the whole universe. Because this field is a mirror for everything we create within us, we create compassion in the world by becoming compassion in our lives. The field is reflecting what it is we are becoming. So we must become in our lives the things we choose to experience in the world around us. Not only are we connected through a field of energy, but we are the field, and we are creating the field. all at the same time. And from what this article and the quantum science is telling us now, the whole field is compassion. And when you think about it, compassion is just another way to say love. It's another aspect of love. We know that love is not an action. It's not something we do. Rather, it is an essence. It is who we are, just as it is who God is. A few moments ago, in the piece I just read, it asked a question that I want to go back to. It said, so when we ask the question, who are we? Our answer must incorporate our relationship to the divine matrix, this field which we now know is made of love and compassion. So when we act in a way that is not compassionate, when we behave in a manner that is not loving, we're actually going against our true nature and what we are made up of. So everything that's coming at us from all sides on a daily basis, we know, we've talked about this before, all the stuff that's coming at us is just really nothing more than a giant advertisement trying to convince us that our lives are miserable and incomplete. Well, why do you think they're trying to convince us of this? Because they know in reality that's not the truth. And if and when we realize that, when we know that, when we become that self-aware and enlightened populace that Brene Brown was talking about, then we will know we don't need to buy whatever it is they're trying to sell us. And their game is over. That's why they, whoever they are, the powers that be, the people that are all about money, power, greed, and control, don't want us to ever know truly who we are. And what we are, even at a cellular level, is love and compassion. And the way we cultivate and create more of that in the world is not really to become it, but to realize that we already are it. So, I remember another old song. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. But the truth is there's not too little of it. There's just too little of it being exhibited and demonstrated and realized because we have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten that's what we are. We need to wake up to the fact that it's all around us. Literally, it is the force. It is the field that connects us all. The rest of those lyrics of that song talk about no, not just for some, but for everyone. We have allowed ourselves to be divided. And if we choose to continue down the road of division, we will be conquered. But the antidote, the key, is to realize we are love, which causes us to see others as ourselves and therefore with compassion, which allows us to forgive, which leads us out of the labyrinth of suffering. Okay, so you see how it all works together. I talked a little bit on Sunday about how symbolic I think it is that this particular year, Easter in the Christian tradition, the Passover in the Jewish tradition, and Ramadan in the Islamic tradition, all the holy days of the three major Abrahamic religions, all fell on the same day. Okay? And in case you weren't here on Sunday or you weren't listening online, that's the first time this has happened in 3 decades, in 30 years. So to me, that just says God keeps giving us chances to come together, to see groups of people who we have previously considered our enemies, who we have allowed someone else to convince us are our enemies, with compassion, to realize that we are all from the same seed, Abraham, and ultimately beyond that, from the same source, one God. Peace is possible. We can stop fighting and killing each other. We can end the suffering. But as one of our quotes said, we can only do that when we choose to forgive. And we can only forgive if we can first begin to see each other through the eyes of compassion. So you may be saying or thinking right now, well, all of that religious violence doesn't concern me. I'm not responsible for any of that. I don't live in the Middle East where they're still fighting over this little chunk of land that's only several square miles big called Jerusalem. What's that even got to do with me? What can I possibly do to change any of that? Well, you can cultivate compassion in your own life, in your own little corner of the world, because every time you do, you put that much more love and that much more light and that much more good into the field that connects us all. So I want to end where I began, by reading the first quote that I read today, because this is what you can do. This is what all of us can do. You can dare to be. When a new day begins, dare to smile gratefully. When there is darkness, dare to be the first to shine a light. When there is injustice, dare to be the first to condemn it. When something seems difficult, dare to do it anyway. When life seems to beat you down, dare to fight back. When there seems to be no hope, find some. When you're feeling tired, dare to keep going. When times are tough, dare to be tougher. When love hurts you, dare to love again. When someone is hurting, dare to help them heal. When another is lost, dare to help them find their way. When a friend falls, dare to be the first to extend a hand. When you cross paths with another, dare to make them smile. When you feel great, dare to help someone else feel great too. When the day has ended, dare to feel as if you have done your best. Dare to be the best you can. At all times, dare to be. Amen. I love you. Please join us tomorrow night at 6:30 for our Wednesday study series on the gifts of imperfection, and we will see you again on Sunday. Have a peaceful week.